Speaking to you direct from San Francisco.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Drew Pearson, Paris. The war is now practically over on the Western Front, officially. Here is the inside story of how it was accomplished without declaring VE Day. When the German leaders refused to deal with the Russians or surrender to them, someone in the Western High Command surrendered to the Russians. There was no reason why they couldn't surrender front by front. In other words, the German commander facing General Devers along the River Elbe could surrender to him. And the German commander facing Marshal Montgomery along the Hamburg-Bremen front could surrender also to him. These fronts have been divided up at the demand of the Russians, who insisted that we not go beyond the River Elbe. Therefore, with each front carefully roped off, it was decided that there was no need of our wasting more British and American lives if the German commanders opposite us wanted to surrender. However, VE Day and the official end of the entire European war must wait for the end on the Russian front also. The Red Army is rapidly mopping up the few remaining pockets, and VE Day should come very soon. Allied headquarters, Paris. Hitler's doctor, Major Erwin Geising, has just captured by the American Army, denies emphatically that Hitler could have died of cerebral hemorrhage. Dr. Geising took care of Hitler when he was wounded from a bomb last July, and says he could easily identify him from the scars. There have now been two different official versions of Hitler's death. Personally, I won't believe either version unless the body is found. The easiest way for any criminal to escape is to put out the story that he is dead. Chongqing. The United States has received a new peace feeler from Japan. However, it does not involve unconditional surrender. There is no way of telling what is behind this peace feeler except this. Premier Suzuki and the entire Japanese moderate class are simply scared to death over the fall of Germany. They would like desperately to work out a negotiated peace. Suzuki has secretly begun reshuffling all Jap military commanders so that men personally loyal to him will be in command. He wants to oust the fanatical fascist Jap commanders who once tried to assassinate him because he was too moderate. Apparently, Suzuki is making the secret reorganization so that if Japan does decide to surrender, he won't be faced with fanatical commanders in the front lines who refuse to lay down their arms the same way some Nazis did in Germany. Hollywood. Some movie houses are holding back against showing the atrocity pictures of how the Nazis starved innocent civilians. They are afraid unpleasant pictures will make the American public quit going to the movies. However, in my opinion, the American people not only can take it, but should take a second or even third look at these pictures whenever they hear any appeasers proposing a soft peace. The War Department. A strict barrier between Russian and American troops has been thrown up along the River Elbe. There can be no crossing this line, nor fraternizing among Russian and American soldiers, though both have a great admiration for each other. This order was given by the Russians and is considered unfortunate by many Americans, because the best way to keep the peace is to make friends, and the Russians are a friendly people. Incidentally, complete confirmation of my story, previously denied, that the American Army withdrew from the suburbs of Berlin to let the Russians occupy that city, has now been received from Paris. Not only has the Associated Press carried confirmation, but Supreme Allied Headquarters. May I remark in passing that this is the second time Allied Headquarters has seen fit to deny my column, only to reverse itself later. The White House exclusive. Here is the inside story on why Assistant Secretary of State Nelson Rockefeller hastily flew back to Washington from San Francisco. It was to explain the Argentine situation to President Truman. Truman had reluctantly given his okay to the general policy of seating Argentina at the conference, but he did not expect the job to be jammed through with high-handed tactics over the objection of other nations, who asked only for a 4-day delay to consider the matter. The whole thing left a very sour taste in Truman's mouth, so Rockefeller hurried back to try to explain things. Washington. General William Donovan, head of the Office of Strategic Services, has just received from his overzealous aides a detailed plan for American war on Russia. I am sure that General Donovan himself and the more responsible members of his super spy organization had nothing to do with these war plans. But I suggest that stupidity like this, which, if it leaks to me, will also leak to others, including the Russians, causes distrust between allies, just as we are trying to end this war and build up a plan to end all wars. Berlin. The devastation of Berlin and Cologne is so great that some construction experts believe they will never be rebuilt. It may be healthier and faster to build new cities alongside them. San Francisco. This all-important security conference took 2 nosedives over the weekend, but I still think we'll come out all right. 1 was the British position on conquered islands and colonies. 2 was the arrest of 16 Polish underground leaders. This came just as final Polish settlement seemed just around the corner. The 16 Polish leaders were arrested on charge of working against the Red Army, especially General Abulicki, who allegedly set up radio stations behind the Russian lines in Poland and sabotaged the Soviet advance. The incident confirms my belief that the Russian generals are getting all-powerful and even overriding Stalin and Molotov. The British position on islands and colonies is also discouraging. The British don't want to open any of their old colonies, don't want any areas mandated by the old League of Nations, such as Palestine, to come under the new United Nations. And finally, they want the United Nations to inspect all fortifications on islands that we have taken in this war, including Iwo Jima, Okinawa, Tarawa, and Saipan. President Roosevelt had been willing to open these islands to the United Nations, provided the British reciprocated. However, I predict that the United States will never consent to the British proposal without reciprocity. These are the two discouraging factors at the San Francisco conference to date. Stumbling blocks which should have been smoothed out in advance if we had more skillful, far-sighted diplomats running this all-important conference. And now in just a minute, I'll be back with tonight's predictions of things to come.
With tonight's edition of his exclusive feature, Predictions of Things to Come.
Prediction number 1, the Truman administration's first big shakeup. I predict that several high-ranking figures in Washington will soon be transferred or lose their jobs. 1, ex-Senator Gillette of Iowa will resign as chairman of the Surplus War Property Board. Not because President Truman wants him to, but because Gillette is fed up with the bickering over war property and probably will become rural electrification administrator. 2, I predict that General Frank Hines, now head of the Veterans Administration, will resign at the suggestion of the White House. 3, I predict that General Henry Arnold, much publicized head of the Air Forces, will also resign. President Truman, when head of the Senate committee, had occasion to investigate some of Arnold's work. Finally, I predict that Robert Murphy, State Department advisor to General Eisenhower, who leans toward a soft peace, will be transferred. Prediction number 2, prosperity or depression. The most important home front problem facing us after the war with Germany is domestic prosperity. So here is my prediction. 1, there will be no serious unemployment in the first 6 months, though several million war workers will be briefly unemployed while their plants are being reconverted, especially in Detroit, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, and Portland, Oregon. 2nd, I predict that although the American people long have wanted new automobiles and refrigerators, they will not be able to buy either a new car, a new refrigerator, or a large new radio for 1 year. However, I predict that small radios, electric fans, alarm clocks, electric irons will be on the market within 3 months from today. Next, I predict that the War Production Board will give priority help to thousands of small businessmen. Finally, I predict that the OPA will continue to fix price ceilings, but with a good many adjustments, for at least 1 year from now. My last prediction, a tough or soft peace. One of the most important questions facing President Truman is what to do with Germany. Franklin Roosevelt had made a decision on this before he died. Some groups inside the State and War Department since then have leaned toward a soft peace. And there's been some suspicion, especially in Russian quarters, that these groups want to do what was done after the last war, namely build up Germany as a buffer against Russia. So here is my prediction. President Truman will soon come out publicly for the destruction of all German industry which might be used for war, for smashing the German cartels, for taking over all German property outside the Reich, and for making Germany chiefly an agricultural country for the next 50 years. Now, ladies and gentlemen, last week I went out to one of the San Francisco hospitals to visit with the wounded who had come back from the Pacific. And believe me, these boys are following the work of this San Francisco conference almost as carefully as they follow the enemy's battleships on the edge of the horizon, or the Jap sniper behind a tree. The battle deck on which they fought is only 50 yards wide. But unless we can see 12,000 miles both ways from Washington and 20 years ahead, their children will be thinking of gas masks and machine guns instead of catcher's masks and tennis rackets. However, the road to peace must be paved with more than good intentions. It must be paved with give and take. Though all the giving can't be on one side and all the taking on the other. Unfortunately, the road to war is easier than the road to peace. It is easier to dislike than to love your neighbor, especially when he speaks a different language and has been ostracized for 20 years. However, the American people have become accustomed to the rough and tumble of democratic debate. And I know they can appreciate what is happening at San Francisco. We have been debating things out in the open. The 16 arrested Polish leaders, the British ideas on islands and colonies, debating things in a healthy, democratic way. So let's not lose our tempers over pessimistic headlines. Let's be understanding and tolerant. Let's continue the debate sympathetically as we work, fight, give to win the peace and make democracy live.